A looming gas crisis, the stench at Cape Town Harbour because of stranded cattle, indicative, of course, of our logistics mess, the electricity nightmare of the last 16 years, education, unemployment, low growth, rising debt, failing and falling revenues, high inflation and interest rates. It's a veritable list of woes, and all in an election year. The finance minister is going to have to walk a tightrope as he delivers his budget speech today to tell us where the money to attend to all those pressing needs will come from. I'm joined by two guests this morning. Tumelo Marivate is a Senior Associate Director at Deloitte Africa, and Arthur Kamp is the Chief Economist at Sanlam Investments. Tumelo, I'll start with you. The fear of many South Africans, no doubt, is going to be increased taxation.
Bongani, I think given the context you've just outlined, increased taxes are very unlikely. Taxpayers are financially constrained. We've got rising prices, interest rates. Individuals have less disposable income. So I think given that it's also an election year, tax increases are unlikely and will not be sustainable.
So not VAT, not personal income tax. Won't you even predict perhaps an adjustment in income brackets?
What usually happens, Bongani, is because of inflationary increases, income brackets do increase. And what we've seen in the past years is that Treasury has adjusted for that increase. It is possible because there's a shortfall in tax collection this year that the adjustment may be less than inflation to try and collect a little bit more money.
Arthur Kamp, of late, the conversation has been about dipping into reserve funds in the gold foreign exchange and contingency reserve account. Can you explain to our listeners what that is and why it might be a panacea for this pain?
Morning, Bongani. So the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account is on the balance sheet of the South African Reserve Bank. So the South African Reserve Bank holds foreign exchange, but when it's reflected on the balance sheet, it's reflected in rands. So obviously with the rand having weakened so much over the last number of years, there's been a revaluation effect, a very positive one. And so in rand terms, that account has been growing up to current estimates of about 500 billion rand. So that's obviously a lot of money. And so it can be seen as an asset of the state. And technically, or at least in law, it does belong to the Treasury and can be transferred upon agreement between the Reserve Bank and the Treasury. So of course, this is now a potential source of funding. The only question is, how do you then access it? So there are a couple of ways. The one is you could sell the foreign exchange reserves, because this is an unrealized gain, of course. It's just a revaluation effect on the balance sheet. So you can actually sell the reserves to unlock that unrealized gain. So you'd have the transaction costs, but essentially you could then transfer that to the Treasury. The problem, of course, is South Africa doesn't have enough foreign exchange reserves. You've got a very low level, and going forward, you sell your foreign exchange reserves, you weaken the overall balance sheet of the country, almost, if I can put it that way, as it were. The other way of doing it is to monetize it. If you monetize it, essentially you can withdraw from that account, but the Reserve Bank would then need to sterilize the liquidity that then gets created as a result of that. And to sterilize it, it's on at the repo rate, which is currently 8.25%. So it's not free. So you can transfer the money to the Treasury, but effectively the bank would then look for a transfer from the Treasury back to it to compensate for that income loss that it makes.
Tumelo.
So it's not free. So it's just a different way of funding. But of course you can't use the entire amount. You can only use a portion of it because if you have the rand suddenly appreciating sharply, that balance will shrink again, and you've got to therefore take that into account. And you obviously have to put very clear rules in place to use this account.
Tumelo, let me bring you into that conversation now. Isn't that rather like selling the family heirlooms to prop up what some might argue has been an irresponsible government?
I think it's a difficult one, Bongani. I was looking at the data, and when you look at the amount of debt that we have as a country, for every rand that we spent on tax, that we pay on tax, almost 20 cents is used to service our debt.
6 trillion in the next 2 years?
That's I think that's the projection going forward, but it's difficult because we're in a situation where, from a government perspective, demand for government services is increasing. We also know, because of unemployment, challenges around infrastructure, investment backlogs, that we do need to spend that money going forward. So it's about the tight balance between making sure that government is able to deliver the quality services that we expect as a society without unsustainably increasing that debt burden.
Arthur, unions are going to want more wages. There's the issue of the 350 SRD grant, no doubt a key election issue. And then, of course, the spectre of the national health insurance. I mean, court challenges are a certainty even before the president has inked that legislation. What does the finance minister do? Where will the money come from?
Well, this is a very important question. I mean, at the moment, if you look at the current trajectory of fiscal policy, it's unsustainable with the debt ratio rising. So if you look at our current tax base, if you were to, and these are obviously expenditures which need to be looked at. Nobody can deny anybody quality access to healthcare. Unemployment rate 32.1% we saw yesterday. Clearly people need assistance. But what you're going to have to do is create the space for this going forward. And at the moment, we certainly don't have that. So we need to actually start putting the building blocks in place to point towards more sustainable fiscal policy. But if you look historically, successful fiscal consolidation usually involves expenditure cuts. Now, this clearly in our case is going to be extremely difficult. And so you need to look at the other levers that you can pull, and the only other real lever that you can pull is to grow the economy faster, to grow the revenue of the state, to be able to afford these priorities. Alternatively, also, if you look at our interest bill this year, we're looking at perhaps something like 390 billion rands worth of interest paid. That's more than the company income tax take. To try and lower that in the sense that you try and lower the interest rate that you're paying on that debt. In other words, improve your track record and show proper intent to stabilize the debt ratio and to bring it down, which would then hopefully make investors demand a lower compensation on the money that they lend you. So you need to put building blocks in place around those factors to then make all of this sustainable long term. There's no magic lever we can pull here to suddenly afford all of this stuff. And a final point I'd like to make here is that your point about selling the family silver is extremely important. The gold and foreign exchange contingent reserve account is an asset of the state. What you want to do here is you don't want to weaken the balance sheet of the state further. So it would be ideal if whatever you withdrew from that account, and you can't withdraw the entire amount, as I've said, but whatever you withdraw, if you could pay off debt with that, you actually then obviously, you've run down the asset, but you at least paid off debt. So on a net basis, the balance sheet of the state hasn't been weakened. So not to use it to fund additional spending now, because as I say, it's not free. You need to sterilize that. The Reserve Bank will need to sterilize that costs. And so the better alternative for me here, is to use it to repay off debt, and that will keep the entire balance sheet intact.
Thank you both for your time. Tumelo Marivate, Senior Associate Director at Deloitte Africa, and Arthur Kamp, Chief Economist at Sanlam Investments. How soon do we go to the IMF with a begging bowl? I mean, as you listen to that, is it your sense that there's any light at the end of the tunnel? Or are you, like me, reminded of Simon and Garfunkel? Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Join us. This is 702.